You know that moment when your entire world crumbles in front of a crowd of strangers? When everything you believed about your life, your family, your struggles, everything turns out to be one massive soul-crushing lie? Yeah, well, buckle up, because that's exactly what happened to me on what was supposed to be the best day of my life, my graduation day. The day I thought I was finally going to escape the financial hell I'd been living in for years. Instead, it became the day I discovered that the people who were supposed to love me most had been systematically destroying my future while I worked myself to the bone just to survive. I'm going to tell you a story that still makes my hands shake when I think about it. A story about betrayal so deep, so calculated, that it took me months of therapy just to process the magnitude of what was done to me. And I'm telling you this because maybe, just maybe, someone out there needs to hear that they're not alone in discovering that the people they trusted most were the ones stabbing them in the back. So here we go. Picture this. It's graduation day at one of the largest universities in the state. Thousands of families packed into this massive auditorium, everyone dressed up, taking pictures, crying happy tears. The whole American dream package, right? 4 years of hell, student loans that'll haunt me until I'm 60. But hey, I made it. I actually made it. I'm 23 years old, and I can count on one hand the number of times in the last 4 years that I haven't been exhausted. You want to know what my life looked like? I worked two part-time jobs while carrying a full course load. I delivered food for Uber Eats until 2 in the morning, then got up at 6 to work at a campus coffee shop before my first class. I lived in a cramped apartment with three other broke college students, sleeping on a mattress on the floor because I couldn't afford a bed frame. My diet? Ramen noodles, peanut butter sandwiches, and whatever free food I could scavenge from campus events. I wore the same 5 outfits on rotation because I couldn't afford new clothes. My phone was cracked because I couldn't afford to fix it. I walked everywhere because I couldn't afford a car, couldn't even afford the bus most days. And you know what the worst part was? I thought this was just how life was supposed to be. I thought everyone struggled like this. I thought my family was just as broke as I was. My mother and stepfather lived in this modest little rental house about an hour away. They always seemed stressed about money, always talking about how tight things were, how they couldn't help me with school, how I needed to learn to be independent. And like an idiot, I believed them. I respected them for it even. I thought they were teaching me valuable life lessons about hard work and self-reliance. But there were things that didn't quite add up, you know? Little things that nagged at me, but that I explained away because I trusted them. They always seemed to have new phones every year while I was stuck with my cracked screen. There were these mysterious shopping bags that would appear in their house, always quickly hidden away when I visited. They'd take these random weekend trips, always vague about where they were going or why. And every time my aunt's name came up in conversation, they got this weird, nervous energy. My aunt. God, where do I even start with her? She was my mother's younger sister, and she was successful. Like, really successful. She'd built some kind of consulting business from the ground up and had done incredibly well for herself. But here's the thing. She lived across the country, and I barely saw her growing up. Maybe once or twice a year at family gatherings, if that. She was always kind to me, always seemed genuinely interested in my life and my goals. But I assumed she was just being polite. Rich people being nice to their poor relatives, you know? So, graduation day arrives, and I'm nervous as hell but also excited. I'm about to walk across that stage and officially have my degree. All those years of barely sleeping, of choosing between textbooks and groceries, of being so tired I could barely think straight, it was all about to be worth it. My mom and stepfather were there, sitting in the audience with their cameras, looking appropriately proud but also weirdly tense. I figured they were just emotional about their kid graduating. The ceremony went off without a hitch. I walked across that stage, shook hands with the dean, got my diploma, the whole 9 yards. Afterward, we were all milling around outside the auditorium, taking pictures, saying goodbye to classmates. That's when I saw her walking toward us, and I swear my heart stopped. My aunt. She was there, looking absolutely stunning in this expensive-looking outfit, walking with purpose and confidence like she owned the place. She had someone with her, this professional-looking woman in a business suit who was clearly her assistant or something. And the look on my mother's face when she saw them approaching? Pure panic. Like she'd seen a ghost. My aunt walked right up to me with this huge smile and wrapped me in this warm, genuine hug. "Congratulations, sweetheart," she said, and I could tell she really meant it. "I'm so proud of you. You've worked so incredibly hard for this." And then she said the words that changed everything. She pulled back from the hug, still smiling, and said, "So, are you enjoying the condo I bought you?" I blinked. I must have looked confused because I was confused. "What condo?" I asked, laughing a little, because I thought maybe she was joking. But her smile didn't falter. She just looked at me expectantly, like she was waiting for me to remember something obvious. "The condo," she repeated, "the one I purchased for you. You moved in last month, right? How are you finding it?" "Aunt Sarah," I said slowly, feeling this weird knot forming in my stomach. "I don't have a condo. I live in an apartment with 3 roommates. I share a bathroom with 5 people total, if you count the people upstairs." That's when her smile disappeared. Completely. Just vanished like someone had flipped a switch. She stood there for a moment perfectly still, and I could see her processing what I'd just said. The noise from all the other families around us seemed to get quieter, like the world was holding its breath. Then she turned, slowly, deliberately, to face my mother. And when she spoke, her voice was so calm it was terrifying. "Then where," she said, each word perfectly articulated, "is the $750,000 I transferred 2 years ago?" The world stopped. I'm not being dramatic. It literally felt like everything around us just stopped existing. The conversations, the laughter, the car horns in the distance. It all faded away until all I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. $750,000. $750,000. That's what she'd said, right? I must have heard wrong. That couldn't be right. That was more money than I'd ever imagined having in my entire life. That was enough to pay off all my student loans and buy a house and still have money left over. That was enough to change everything. My mother's face went white. Not pale, white, like all the blood had just drained out of her body. My stepfather was looking away, studying his shoes like they were the most fascinating thing he'd ever seen. And my aunt just stood there, waiting for an answer, with this look of dawning realization and fury building in her eyes. "Mom?" I said, my voice sounding weird and far away even to myself. "What is she talking about?" But my mother couldn't speak. She was just standing there, opening and closing her mouth like a fish, no sound coming out. And that's when I knew. That's when I knew that something was very, very wrong. My aunt's assistant, because that's what she was, I realized now, stepped forward and whispered something in my aunt's ear. My aunt nodded curtly, never taking her eyes off my mother. "We need to talk," my aunt said, and it wasn't a request. "Now. Privately." The next few minutes were a blur of awkward explanations to confused bystanders, of my aunt's assistant somehow arranging for us to use a private conference room in the university's administration building. I followed along like a zombie, not really understanding what was happening, but knowing that whatever it was bad, really bad. The conference room was sterile and corporate, with a long table and uncomfortable chairs. My aunt sat at the head of the table like she was conducting a board meeting. Her assistant placed a leather portfolio in front of her and opened it, revealing stacks of papers that I couldn't read from where I was sitting. My mother and stepfather sat across from me, and I could see that my mother was shaking. "Let me explain something to my niece," my aunt said, her voice still deadly calm. "2 years ago, when you started your junior year, I set up a trust fund for you, $750,000 to be exact. The money was intended to pay for your remaining education expenses, set you up in a nice condominium, and give you a solid financial foundation to start your adult life." I couldn't breathe. I literally couldn't breathe. $750,000. For me. 2 years ago, while I was working myself to death and eating ramen for every meal. "The money was transferred to your mother and stepfather as trustees," she continued, "with explicit instructions that it was to be used solely for your benefit, your education, your housing, your future. I trusted them to manage it responsibly until your graduation, at which point they were to transfer everything remaining to you directly." She opened one of the folders and pulled out a bank statement. Even from across the table, I could see columns of numbers, and the bottom line made my vision blur. There were only 4 digits left. Only 4 digits where there should have been 7. "This," she said, sliding the paper across the table toward me, "is what remains of your trust fund. $18,437.63. The room started spinning. 18,000 out of 750,000. They had spent over 90% of my money, my future, my escape from the poverty I'd been living in for years, thinking I had no choice. "Where?" my aunt said, and now I could hear the rage she was trying so hard to control. "Did my money go?" My stepfather finally looked up. "Now listen here," he started. "No." My aunt cut him off, her voice like ice. "You listen. This wasn't your money. This wasn't your wife's money. This was my niece's money, held in trust, and you were legally obligated to use it only for her benefit. So I'm going to ask you one more time, where is my money?" That's when my mother finally found her voice. We, we were going to tell her," she whispered. "Tell me what?" I managed to croak out. "We borrowed some of it," my stepfather said, and I wanted to punch him for how casual he sounded. "We were having some financial difficulties, and we knew you were doing fine on your own." "Fine?" I exploded, finally finding my voice. "Fine? I've been eating one meal a day for the past 6 months because I couldn't afford groceries. I've been walking 2 hours to get to my job because I couldn't afford bus fare. I've been wearing the same winter coat for 3 years because I couldn't afford a new one, and it's held together with duct tape. What part of that seems fine to you?" "We were going to pay it back," my mother said, tears starting to fall down her cheeks. "We just needed a little help getting through some tough times." Tough times? My aunt's assistant had apparently been busy because she was now placing more papers on the table. Receipts, credit card statements, bank records. "Let me tell you about these tough times," my aunt said, picking up the first document. "March of last year, first-class flights to Hawaii, $4,800, charged to the trust account." She picked up another paper. "May of last year, designer handbags from Louis Vuitton, $3,200, trust account." Another paper. July of last year. Down payment on a rental property in Scottsdale. $45,000. Trust account. She kept going, and going, and going. Each item was another punch to the gut. Another piece of my future that had been stolen from me while I scraped together quarters to do my laundry. August of last year, investment in cryptocurrency that lost $28,000 within 3 weeks. Trust account. Paper after paper after paper. October of last year, payment to a consulting business that, according to state records, was incorporated the day before the payment and has never filed any tax returns or shown any business activity. $60,000. Trust account. I couldn't speak. I couldn't think. I was looking at years of my life laid out in black and white. Years where I had cried myself to sleep because I was so stressed about money, where I had called my mother begging for help with rent and been told that life is tough, you need to learn to deal with it, where I had sold my textbooks at the end of each semester to afford groceries, and this whole time, they had been living off my money, while I suffered, while I struggled, while I thought I was learning important lessons about independence and hard work. The rental property in Scottsdale is currently generating $1,200 a month in income, my aunt's assistant said, speaking for the first time. It's titled in your stepfather's name. We needed the investment income, my stepfather said, and his voice was getting defensive now. We were going to use the rental income to pay back the trust. At $1,200 a month, I said, doing the math in my head. It would take you over 50 years to pay back what you stole. 50 years. I would be in my 70s before I saw that money. It wasn't supposed to be like this, my mother sobbed. We were going to make better investments. We were going to turn it into more money for you. With cryptocurrency? I screamed. You were going to turn my college fund into more money by gambling with cryptocurrency? The silence that followed was deafening. My mother was crying openly now, and my stepfather was staring at the table. My aunt was perfectly composed, but I could see the fury burning behind her eyes. There's more, the assistant said quietly, placing another set of documents on the table. We've traced payments for luxury shopping, expensive dinners, a lease on a BMW that was returned after 6 months, payments to a day spa totaling over $8,000, and what appears to be a series of cash withdrawals that we haven't been able to account for yet. Cash withdrawals. They had been taking my money out in cash, so there wouldn't be a paper trail, so I wouldn't be able to find out exactly how they had spent it. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that I felt physically sick. You stole from me, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. For 2 years, while I was killing myself trying to survive, you were stealing my future. My aunt trusted you to take care of me, and you stole from me. We're your family, my mother cried. We would never steal from you. We borrowed it. We were going to... You were never going to pay it back, I said, and suddenly I could see everything clearly. You spent it all. You gambled it away and spent it on luxuries while I was living like a homeless person, and you were never going to tell me about it. When were you planning to tell me, Mom? On my wedding day? When I had kids? Never? The silence stretched out between us like a chasm, because we all knew the answer. They were never going to tell me. They were going to let me struggle for the rest of my life, thinking I was just unlucky, just not smart enough or hardworking enough to get ahead. They were going to let me blame myself for my poverty while they enjoyed the life that my money had bought them. Here's what's going to happen, my aunt said, and her voice was like steel. You have 2 choices. We can handle this privately, or we can handle this through the courts. If we handle it privately, You're going to return every penny of that money, plus interest, plus damages. The rental property gets transferred to my niece immediately. Any assets purchased with trust fund money get transferred to my niece immediately. You're going to liquidate whatever you need to liquidate to make this right. And if we refuse, my stepfather asked, then I'll have you both arrested for embezzlement, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. The trust was legally documented. Every transfer was recorded. My assistant has already prepared all the necessary paperwork for both scenarios. Your choice. I looked at my mother, this woman who had raised me, who had told me she loved me every day of my life, who had hugged me when I cried about how hard everything was. This woman who had been systematically destroying my future while comforting me about my struggles that she had caused. How long? I asked her. How long were you planning to keep lying to me? She couldn't answer. She just sat there crying, and I realized that she didn't have an answer because she had never intended to stop. This was just my life now in her mind. I was just going to struggle forever while she lived comfortably on my dime. I want it all back, I said, turning to my aunt. I don't want them to go to prison, but I want everything back. Every penny, every asset, everything. My aunt nodded. My assistant has already started the paperwork. The rental property will be transferred to you by the end of the week. We've identified 3 other assets that were purchased with trust fund money, a motorcycle, a hot tub, and some jewelry that will also be transferred or liquidated. This will ruin us, my stepfather said. Good, I replied, and I meant it. It should ruin you. You ruined me for 2 years while I trusted you. You made me think I was just unlucky, just not good enough, while you were actively sabotaging my life. You should be ruined. The next hour was a blur of signatures and legal documents and threats. My aunt's assistant was apparently some kind of financial wizard because she had traced every single expenditure, documented every single theft, and prepared recovery documents for everything. The rental property would be transferred to me within a week. The remaining assets would be liquidated and the money returned to my account. They would be required to pay back everything else on a strict schedule, and if they missed even one payment, my aunt would pursue criminal charges. But more than that, they were being cut off, completely. They would have no access to any of my financial information ever again. My aunt was setting up a new trust with herself as the trustee, and my mother and stepfather would have no role in my financial life going forward. We're your family, my mother said as we were getting ready to leave. No, I said, and my voice was steady now. Family doesn't steal from each other. Family doesn't lie to each other for years. Family doesn't let each other suffer while they live in luxury. You're not my family anymore. You're just people who stole from me. And then I walked out. I walked out of that conference room, out of the university, and out of their lives. My aunt took me to dinner that night at this nice restaurant, and I couldn't stop staring at the menu prices. 6 months ago, one meal at this place would have cost me more than I spent on food in a week. She explained everything to me, how she had set up the trust, how she had specifically chosen my parents as trustees because she thought they would have my best interest at heart, how she had been planning to surprise me with the condo as a graduation gift. I should have checked on it sooner, she said, and I could see the guilt in her eyes. I trusted them, and I shouldn't have. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I'm so sorry you went through all of that. But here's the thing. I wasn't sorry. I mean, I was angry, devastated, betrayed, all of that. But I wasn't sorry that it had happened. Because finally, I understood why my life had been so hard. It wasn't because I was unlucky or lazy or stupid. It was because people who were supposed to love me had been actively working against me. The next few months were a whirlwind. The rental property got transferred to me, and suddenly I was a landlord collecting $1,200 a month. My aunt helped me find a small but nice condo that I could actually afford, and for the first time in years, I had my own space, my own bedroom, my own kitchen, a place where I could cook real meals and keep food in the refrigerator without worrying about roommates eating it. I started therapy because, honestly, discovering that your entire life has been built on lies kind of messes with your head. The therapist helped me understand that the betrayal I felt wasn't just about the money, it was about the gaslighting. For 2 years, every time I had struggled, every time I had asked for help, they had made me feel like it was my fault, like I wasn't trying hard enough, like I needed to learn to be more independent. They had watched me suffer and told me it was good for me, all while living off money that was meant to help me. My aunt offered me a job at her consulting firm, starting as a junior analyst. It wasn't charity. She made it clear that I would have to work for it, that I would have to prove myself just like anyone else. But it was an opportunity, and it was more than I'd ever been offered before. I also started dating someone. Alex, a classmate from college who I'd never really talked to before because I was always too busy working or too exhausted to socialize. We ran into each other at a coffee shop a few months after graduation, and when he asked me out, I almost said no out of habit. I was so used to not being able to afford dates, so used to being too tired to be good company. But then I realized I could afford dinner now. I could afford to take an evening off. I could afford to be a normal person. The hardest part wasn't the practical stuff, though. The hardest part was learning to trust people again. For months, every time someone was nice to me, every time someone offered to help me with something, I found myself wondering what they really wanted. What were they getting out of it? What were they planning to take from me? My aunt was patient with this. She understood that I needed time to believe that her help was genuine, that she wasn't going to suddenly present me with a bill for everything she'd done. She never made me feel guilty for being suspicious or for needing proof that her motives were pure. The rental property turned out to be more valuable than anyone had realized. The market in Scottsdale had improved significantly since my stepfather bought it, and when I had it appraised, it was worth almost twice what he had paid for it. My aunt suggested I sell it and invest the money more wisely in a diversified portfolio that would grow steadily over time, rather than the get-rich-quick schemes my stepfather had been drawn to. My mother tried to contact me several times over those first few months. Emails, texts, letters, even showing up at my new condo once. Every message was the same. She was sorry. She never meant for things to go so far. She just wanted to talk to me, to explain. But there was nothing to explain. She had stolen from me for 2 years while I suffered, and then she had planned to never tell me about it. There was no explanation that could make that okay. My stepfather, on the other hand, seemed to think this was all some kind of misunderstanding that would blow over. He sent me a Facebook message 6 months after graduation saying that he hoped I was done being dramatic and that we could get back to being a family. I blocked him immediately. The therapy helped me understand something important. I wasn't angry just about the money. I mean, the money was a big part of it, but it wasn't everything. I was angry about the time. The time I had spent thinking I was just unlucky. The time I had spent blaming myself for not being able to get ahead. The time I had spent being grateful to them for teaching me independence when they were actually just covering up their theft. I was angry about the nights I had stayed awake, worrying about how I was going to pay rent, about the meals I had skipped to save money, about the social events I had missed because I couldn't afford them. I was angry about the stress, the exhaustion, the constant fear of financial disaster. All of that had been unnecessary. All of that had been caused by people who claimed to love me. But more than anything, I was angry about the lies, the gaslighting, the way they had made me feel like my struggles were my fault, like I needed to just try harder, like I was learning valuable lessons about life. They had stolen my money and then convinced me to be grateful for the poverty that resulted from their theft. About a year after graduation, I ran into an old roommate from college. She was working 3 jobs and still struggling to pay off her student loans, still living in the same kind of cramped, overpriced apartment I used to live in. As she told me about her struggles, I found myself wanting to tell her that it wasn't her fault, that she wasn't lazy or unlucky, that sometimes people who are supposed to help us are actually the ones holding us back. But I couldn't figure out how to say that without sounding like I was minimizing her problems or bragging about my situation. So instead, I just listened, and when she apologized for complaining about her life, I told her that she never had to apologize for acknowledging when things were hard. That's when I realized that this experience had given me something valuable, along with all the pain: perspective. I understood now how quickly financial circumstances could change, how much of success and failure was really about access to resources and opportunities. I understood how easy it was for people to blame individuals for systemic problems, to make people feel like their struggles were personal failings rather than the result of larger forces. My aunt and I had dinner every few weeks, and slowly I started to see her not just as my benefactor, but as a person. She told me about building her business, about the failures and setbacks she'd experienced, about the people who had helped her, and the people who had tried to take advantage of her. She was generous with her advice, but never condescending, always careful to ask what I wanted rather than just telling me what she thought was best. The hardest thing about having money, she told me once, is learning who you can trust. People will tell you anything you want to hear if they think they can get something from you, but the people who care about you will be honest with you even when it's uncomfortable. I thought about my parents when she said that. They had never been honest with me about anything that mattered. Even before the trust fund, even when I was a kid, they had always told me what they thought would make me feel better, rather than the truth. When I had asked why we couldn't afford certain things, they had always blamed external circumstances, the economy, their jobs, bad luck. They had never just said, "We choose to spend our money on other things." Maybe that should have prepared me for what they did with my trust fund. Maybe I should have seen it coming. But I think when you're a kid, you have to trust the adults in your life to have your best interests at heart. You don't have a choice. And when that trust gets betrayed, it changes something fundamental about how you see the world. I started volunteering at a financial literacy program at a local community college. Most of the students were working adults trying to get their degrees while supporting families, and many of them were dealing with the same kinds of financial stress I had experienced in college. I taught basic budgeting and helped people understand credit reports and student loans. It was rewarding work, but it was also painful sometimes. I would see students making the same kinds of sacrifices I had made: skipping meals, working multiple jobs, wearing worn-out clothes, walking everywhere to save money. And I wanted to shake them and tell them that it didn't have to be this hard. But for most of them, it did have to be this hard. They didn't have secret trust funds that had been stolen from them. They were just people trying to build better lives with limited resources, and their struggles were real and valid and necessary. Teaching those classes helped me understand something else. My anger at my parents wasn't really about the money. It was about the choice. They had taken away my choice about how to live my life. Instead of letting me decide whether to take on student loans or work multiple jobs, Instead of letting me choose how much struggle I was willing to accept in exchange for independence, they had made those decisions for me. They had forced me into poverty without my knowledge or consent, and then they had made me grateful for it. They had convinced me that the poverty they had forced on me was actually good for me, that it was teaching me valuable lessons, that it was making me stronger and more independent. That was the part that made me feel sick when I thought about it too much. Not just that they had stolen from me, but that they had made me thank them for it. I think that's why I could never forgive them, even after the practical consequences of their theft had been resolved. The money had been returned, the assets had been transferred, the debt was being paid off on schedule. But I could never get back those 2 years of thinking I was just unlucky, just not good enough, just not trying hard enough. I could never get back the stress and exhaustion and fear. I could never unknow what it felt like to be grateful to people who were actively sabotaging me. About 18 months after graduation, my mother sent me a letter. Not an email or a text, but an actual handwritten letter delivered through the mail. She said she understood why I was angry, but she hoped that eventually I would be able to forgive them. She said they had made mistakes, but they had never intended to hurt me. She said she missed me and wanted to be part of my life again. I read that letter probably 50 times before I threw it away. Because here's what she still didn't understand. Intention doesn't matter when the impact is that devastating. They might not have intended to hurt me, but they did hurt me, systematically, for 2 years. And then they covered it up and lied about it and made me feel like my suffering was my own fault. You don't get to steal someone's future and then ask for forgiveness because you didn't mean for it to turn out that way. You don't get to gaslight someone for years and then claim it was all just a misunderstanding. You don't get to watch someone you claim to love struggle and suffer while you live off their money and then act like the real problem is that they're being dramatic about your betrayal. 2 years after graduation, I hosted a small dinner party in my condo. Nothing fancy, just my aunt, a few friends from work, Alex, and one of my former professors who had become a mentor. We cooked together, ate together, talked and laughed together. It was the kind of evening I had dreamed about in college, but never thought I would be able to afford. At the end of the night, after everyone else had gone home, my aunt and I sat on my couch drinking wine and talking. She asked me if I was happy, and I realized that I was, not just content or okay, but actually happy. For the first time in years, maybe for the first time in my adult life, I was genuinely happy. You know, I told her, in a weird way, I'm almost grateful this happened. She looked surprised. Really? Not grateful for what they did, I clarified quickly. I'll never be grateful for that, but grateful that I found out. Because otherwise, I would have spent my whole life wondering why I couldn't get ahead. Why everything was so much harder for me than it seemed to be for everyone else. I would have blamed myself for their theft forever. She nodded slowly. That might be the worst part of what they did. Not just taking your money, but making you think it was your fault that you didn't have any. That's exactly what it was. The theft was bad enough, but the gaslighting was worse. The way they had made me internalize their crime as my personal failing. The way they had convinced me to be grateful for the poverty that resulted from their betrayal. But I was free of that now. I understood what had happened to me, and I understood that it wasn't my fault. I understood that my struggles hadn't been the result of personal weakness or bad luck or insufficient effort. They had been the result of people who claimed to love me actively working against my interests while convincing me that they were helping me. And maybe that understanding was worth something. Maybe it was worth the pain and the betrayal and the anger. because now I knew. Now I could see clearly. Now I could make real choices about my life based on actual circumstances rather than lies. I'll probably never have a relationship with my mother and stepfather again. That's not anger anymore. It's just reality. Trust, once broken that completely, can't be repaired with apologies and explanations. Some betrayals are too deep, too calculated, too sustained to forgive. Some lies are too fundamental to move past. But I'm okay with that. I'm building a life based on honesty and genuine relationships and real opportunities. I'm surrounded by people who support me without expecting anything in return, who celebrate my successes without resentment, who help me when I need help because they care about me, not because they want something from me. And if my story helps even one person recognize that their struggles might not be their fault, that the people they trust might not have their best interests at heart, that they deserve better than what they're getting, then maybe all of this pain will have served some purpose. Because here's what I want everyone to know. If the people in your life are making you feel like your problems are your fault while they benefit from your struggles, if they're telling you that your poverty is good for you while they live in comfort, if they're making you grateful for help they're not actually providing, you might be being betrayed in ways you don't even realize yet. Trust your instincts. Ask questions. Demand transparency. And remember that people who really love you want you to succeed, want you to be comfortable, want you to have opportunities. They don't benefit from your struggles. They don't profit from your poverty. They don't steal your future and then convince you to thank them for it. You deserve better. And if the people in your life are making you feel like you don't, then maybe it's time to ask yourself who's really benefiting from that belief.